Okay, so in this video I want to talk about the right shoulder, so your trail shoulder, and I think it's a really good indication in the golf swing between the contrast between a pro and an amateur. You'll always see the amateur will kind of have a very high sort of shoulder position, as opposed to the pro, the trail shoulder would really drop down. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to sort of talk about how you're doing these things, you know, or what you should be trying to do to get this shoulder down. I'm also going to talk about why I think you're having difficulty doing it, and then I'm going to sort of just try and summarize it in a very simple way, exactly how you are going to end up doing it. So what's basically needs to happen is for me to be able to get my shoulder down like so, what it also means is that my pelvis has to move to my left. So if my pelvis doesn't, and it moves, should we say, towards my right, or it stays very central, it's anatomically, well, it's obviously very uncomfortable to get the shoulder down without sort of forcing a lot of manipulation in and around the spine. So I think if you've ever practiced getting your shoulder down, it's not as simple as just doing this or some sort of contortion of spine. What you have to do is you also have to understand that if my pelvis shifts this way and my head stays still, it tilts. Do you see what I mean? It tilts my pelvis this way. Sorry, the pelvis moves this way, so it becomes tilted, and my shoulders will always try and align itself to the pelvis. So that's how you're truly going to get that shoulder down, is by also understanding that your pelvis has to move towards the left side. Now, I think one of the other reasons why a lot of amateurs struggle with the concept of the trail shoulder down is it's probably something that you've experienced with at some stage, or it's something that students of mine experience with at some stage, but the contact is poor. So they'll try and drop the shoulder down, but then they'll kind of like, well, how do I stop hitting the ground? Now, the reason for this is because what needs to happen in the downswing is, and again, obviously we see this with pros, is that the hands go over the ball. So see the way my hands are over the ball. As I get towards roughly parallel, you'll tend to see pros will either have the hands directly over the ball or at least within the width of the stance, meaning, you know, not here. Now, most amateurs are here. Okay, most amateurs' hand path is very wide, and then obviously if you try and drop your shoulder down, then you're going to hit the ground further, and this is why most amateurs tend to do things like chuck the shoulder in and get quite spinny and early hip extension, because it's to do anything to get the club on the back of the golf ball. And then obviously you end up with a bit of a brain mess, because you know you're not supposed to do this, but you find it almost impossible to hit the ball without doing it. So what therefore, if you understand that we need some pelvic movement towards the lead side to drop the shoulder down, and if you understand that, you know, if you try and drop the shoulder down and your hands aren't coming down narrow enough, that's why it won't work. I personally think the best thing to do is just to practice an exaggeration of trying to hold on as much shaft lean as you can. So one of the things I work with a lot of my students is I try and encourage them to exaggerate. And what I'm trying to get them to exaggerate is, well, if that's my address position here, and I'm going to draw a vertical line just over my lead ankle, and let's say at the post-impact position, I realistically want to try and keep the shaft still vertical. So this is kind of really controlling the low point like so. Well, then that's where we're trying to get to. So as you see this position here, can you see the way that to be able to keep the hands forward at this point in time, I've had to do the things that I've discussed. My pelvis has moved to the left, meaning it's not here or here, and my shoulder has had to drop down. Now, what you need to do to get into this position is practice trying to keep it lower here. See what I mean? See how the way I'm keeping my hands forward? And that's what you'll find is to keep the shaft vertical for longer. Then what it requires is for you to figure out a way to get your trail shoulder lower to the ground. And obviously you've got to do this inside your own physical limitation. And you also only need to do this the necessary amount to stop the trail arm straightening before the hit. But what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to lend an ear for how I encourage some of my students to experiment in their practice. And what we always go for is whether a golfer transitions like this. You know, I don't really, although it's a pivoting problem, I don't really bring their attention so much to that. I bring their attention to what we're trying to do here. Because if you understand you're trying to do this, your pivot will change based on that little bit of knowledge that it's stopping. You do that, you can't do that. You do that, you'll learn. And that's the way that I think you've got to try and adopt this. Think about that post-impact position. Think about the idea that you're trying to keep the shaft as vertical as you can for as long as you can, and you'll find that you'll improve. So great little drills just to feel it are: get set up to the golf ball, hinge the back of your wrist, so that basically means extend the back of my trail wrist so it lifts the club up in the air but it keeps my hands over the ball. Get my hands further forward so it brings the club back close to the ball, and then just sort of experiment with dropping that trail shoulder down, and that'll just give you a feeling of being in this type of position. And then you can just experiment with that, and what you'll find, and what students of mine find, is it's different. because it's lower, it's a different perspective. It will feel like your head stays back instead of somebody who hits it like this. But what you'll also find is actually it's fine, because I would say to students, keep the left leg flexed. Keep it flexed so you can stay lower. You know, don't try and sort of, jump yourself out of it. And what they'll find is that it's different, but it's not uncomfortable. So I'm not saying contort your spine, drop your shoulder, twist your spine, excessive side bend, drive your elbow, contort yourself. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is your objective should be to find a way to hold on to shaft lean for as long as you can. And the way you should do that is you should experiment with that impact. Hinge the wrists, feel like you're letting that shoulder drop, let that pelvis move a little to the left, and you should start to find, actually, I can get myself into this position. It will feel very different. And what I'm saying is you don't have to be in exactly that position, but you need to possess those patterns of motion to be able to hold on to shaft lean for longer. So that's how you're going to drop the shoulder. The shoulder really kind of drops as a byproduct of everything else. This shoulder will drop down if the pelvis moves enough this way, and this shoulder will drop down based on the idea that you're trying to hold on to this angle for as long as possible. I think if you're trying to force the shoulder down, that's probably why you've had mixed results. See you soon.